information which is happening throughout the globe with the help of the mass media institutions. So, as when we have discussed about the typology of communication, that we have discussed about the different types of communication, where intrapersonal communication, interpersonal communication, group and mass communication. But here, if you see, the mass communication and interactive forms of communication are the only one which reaches the large number of audiences. So here, the mass media institutions are working, like if you see the newspapers, depending on the reach of the newspaper, we may receive, as the readers, we may read the newspaper or the magazines, etc. Or sometimes, if it is a television, earlier, due to the terrestrial transmission, we used to receive the signals to a specific geographical area. But later on, after the satellite communication came into existence, uh, whenever the incident happens in any part of the globe, etc., that can be covered in live with the help of the OB vans or DSNG vans. OB is the outdoor broadcasting van, and the DSNG is also another one we use to disseminate the information from the location in live. So there is a trend called live reporting, exclusive reporting, breaking news, etc. So those kind of information, as if the event happens, that is going to be covered in live because of this technology is available, and the satellite communication which made possible to reach the large number of audiences in live also. So here, when we are working in the media organization, uh, we have to follow certain ethics. So this paper, what you have is the media ethics, etc. That will help you if you are entering into the profession. It will help you to know the laws which are enacted, and the journalist has to follow what kind of ethical principles a journalist has to follow if they are working for the media organization, etc. And as an individual also, we might follow certain ethical principles in the society, the way we have to behave, the way we have to dress, or the way we have to speak, etc., or the way we have to live in a society without hurting others' sentiments, etc. So the same way, if you are working in a media organization also, you have to follow certain ethical principles that we call as the journalistic codes or journalistic ethics, or the code of ethics a journalist has to follow. Even as a normal human being, you may also become a freelance writer, or you, if you are writing a blog, or if you are maybe disseminating information using your uh, like social media platforms. Even though you are reaching with these kind of platforms to the large number of audiences, you need to follow certain ethical guidelines or the principles. So these principles or the ethical principles are the guidelines will govern the conduct of the individuals. And if you are working in a media institution, these media ethics or the principles will help us to uh, which gives us a kind of satisfaction, and if it also eliminates the risks which may prevail if you present some information which is relates to a person or a government or an organization, etc. So the media is expanding very fast, and there are channels 24 into 7 basis. There are different kinds of channels which came into existence from 1990 onwards, when the liberalization, globalization, and yes, one second. So, yes, sorry for the disturbance. There was net problem. So where the media is expanding very fast, and we have 24/7 channels, which means all through the 24 hours in a day, we may be able to get the news from the television channels. So when we are working into this 24/7, there is a hectic work which happens in the media organizations, and sometimes the journalists also get into dilemmas whether the news has to go the way it has to be presented, or whether the story has to be rejected, or it has to be carried in the broadcast media, whether the story has to be killed, or if it has to be printed, or if it has to be carried in the broadcast media, how it has to be presented, what are the implications will be there if the story is carried out in the broadcast media. So whether the story is accurate or not. The news institutions also may get fake information released, or something happened somewhere, etc. So they have to verify the facts also. So here, the media institutions will follow certain ethical principles, and it gives them credibility and reliability, and it also makes a moral base for the journalism. Why only we see certain channels, or why we only read only a few newspapers? Because we feel that what is printed in those newspapers is maybe accurate information, and we only follow certain news channels. We feel they transmit the information which is accurate, etc. They are not, the news is not biased when, if you see I want the certain kind of channels, etc. So here, media is a organization. It is called as a fourth estate, and it is acts as a watchdog of the society. Because of that, it has to promote, or it has to present the information uh, which is accurate for the readers or the viewers and also the listeners. So each profession might, each the persons who are into different kinds of professions, they do have certain ethical principles they follow, like a medical field or any other professional fields. The same way, the journalism or the journalists or the news organizations also have to follow certain ethical principles. What the ethical principles, we call them as the code of ethics. The ethics, the word of ethics is derived from the word called ethos. The study of ethics began nearly 2,500 years ago in ancient Greek, and later on, many other societies also, they started studying the concept called ethics. Basically, the ethics deals with what is right and what is wrong. So, and it involves the character and conduct of the individuals and also the organizations. So, whether if it is right, then we can go about printing a news. If it is wrong, we have to kill the story. So, the same way, it also like it also decides the character of an individual or also an organization. So here, the ethics, the branch of ethics, it deals with the moral aspects of a profession. It can be any profession. And if it is an individual also, the ethical principles or the philosophy of ethics deals with the moral aspects of a life of an individual. And ethics are not the principles which certainly an individual has to follow, but these are non-mandatory principles and guidelines that a person, a group, or maybe an organization has to decide, and they have to follow so that they may arrive at right kind of decisions. So when you print a news story, it somewhere or the other it will have its impact on the audience or the one who is reading a news story. So because of that, we have to be very careful when we are sending a story or when we want to print a story. So journalistic ethics deals with the standards or the ethical principles or the guidelines which a journalist or the news media organizations has to follow. Otherwise, the news organization or the television channels, news portals, even the individuals, they may face ethical issues. And the story should also has to be decided whether based on the ethical principles only. For example, a story is you have received a story relates to some bomb blast or some communal violence. First thing is you have to verify the story. Otherwise, you cannot carry the story because it may affect the sentiments of the people. If you print the story, it may also lead to the communal violence or it might incite to an offense. So because of that, we have to be very careful in uh, dealing with those kind of stories. And we have to decide based on these ethical principles only whether a story has to be printed or not. We might have the public interest. Keeping in view the public interest, we have to decide whether a story has to be printed or carried in the broadcast media. So, when we face certain kind of dilemmas, whether a story has to be printed or it has to be killed, etc., in those kind of dilemmas or those kind of situations, etc., these ethical principles will help the journalists to print a story or not, and they also help whether or how the story has to be printed. So here, why the ethical principles or ethics matters. So here, the ethical principles or ethics, they enhances the credibility and reliability. It also builds the reputation of a media organization as well as the journalists who are writing the story for the news organizations. So it also ensures the freedom of the press with a responsibility. So the journalists are accountable to the society or accountable to the one who the one where those who are consuming the news content from the media. So here the ethics also will reduce the governmental intervention on the news which is being carried through the broadcast media. And when you follow the ethical principles, it also gives a sense of satisfaction to the journalists and also the media organizations. So here, if the organization is not credible, which means if the organization prints a story that is biased or the way it continues to print the stories which are biased or which are not following any ethical principles, etc., it will not have any credibility. So no organization will sustain if it has without the credibility. So because of that only, we only tend to read some kind of newspapers because we feel that they present the story which is accurate, etc. And we also, the media organizations also have a freedom, but even though they have to follow certain ethical principles while reporting a news story for the benefit of the viewers, listeners, and also the readers. So here, media has to ensure that it will not affect or it will not fall under the reasonable restrictions which are laid down on the freedom of the press or freedom of speech and also the also expression. So Article 19(1)(a), which speaks that the individuals have the freedom of speech and expression the same way the individuals, the news organizations or media professional organizations also have the freedom of the press, but subject to the reasonable restrictions which are laid down under Article 19(2) of the Indian Constitution. When information which affects the national integrity, unity of the country, when it endangers the security of the country, anything which affects the decency and morality, anything which falls or which leads to the defamation, contempt of court, anything which incite to an offense or etc. All that information we cannot carry through the broadcast media or a print media. So these principles will also give a sense of satisfaction to the journalists when they follow these ethical principles and publish the stories. When you see the origin of the journalistic ethics, the debates and discussions on ethics of journalism started as early as in 1920s itself. There is this theory called social responsibility theory. Sir, 1 second. There is a theory called social responsibility theory, which speaks that the journalists and the media organizations are accountable to the society to whom they are serving. So here there is a commission called Hudson's Commission that was headed by the Chancellor, University of Chicago Chancellor Robert M. Hutchins. After the World War II, this commission was appointed and the commission submitted its report, and it said that the media organizations are involved in printing gossips. Sensationalism also was present, and attacks on the individuals and groups also was present in Indian media, and the Indian media also declined the standards. So because of that, the commission in its report said that the media organizations have to follow certain ethical principles, and it has also said that media organizations have a responsibility towards the society to whom the media organizations are serving. If you see the principles of this social responsibility theory, it speaks that media have an obligation to the society, and the media ownership is called as a public trust. Media is something which is meant for the public, not for making a profits, etc. And news media should present accurate, fair, objective, and relevant information for the readers, viewers, and also the listeners. Media also should access a forum to which presents the ideas for the public. And media should be free and it has to self regulate itself because we don't have like a broadcasting code. And for the print, we have a Press Council of India that regulates the press in our country. But when it comes to the broadcast media organizations, we have NBA News Broadcasters Association, we have VCCC, Broadcasting Content Complaints Council, etc., to regulate the broadcasting content. And All India Radio and Doordarshan, they are owned by the Prasar Bharati organization. So they have their own code of ethics that they follow while they present the information for the public. So here, the media also have an obligation to the society, and it has to serve the needs, interests, and the aspirations of the individuals in a society. And here it also says that media should have credibility. What media reports should be true, whatever is printed in the newspapers or which is carried in the broadcast media. So the commission also said that the media should report objective, accurate information and what is needed for the public, but not what media wants to provide for the public, etc. But there is something called agenda setting. Media is also something which sets an agenda for the public. It prioritizes what has to be printed in the newspaper and what is going to be carried in the broadcast media. But again, that is a different thing. And there are different forces which might set the agenda for the media organizations. So because of that, media is something which sets an agenda for the public, and also the individuals like the media consumers, we also might have our own agenda that we call as public agenda, and we consume only the kind of content we want to consume from the mass media channels. So that is the social responsibility theory. Then if you see the principles of ethics, the journalistic ethics, principles of ethics which form the basis for the journalistic ethics and the norms. So these principles are useful because they provide a philosophical foundation from which the individuals can analyze the ethical situation and make right kind of decisions regarding the news which they print for the benefit of the mass media audiences. So there is something called a principle of golden mean that speaks that the balance and fairness has to be there in news reporting, and that is something which is called as a golden mean. So how we maintain the balance? While providing all the sides of a particular story, we might present the accurate, fair information relates to a particular story. For example, if it is, there is a crime story which happens, so you have to take into account the police version, you have to take into account the eyewitnesses of the incident, you also have to incorporate the information which relates to the victim, etc. So when you present all this information, the balance and fairness is maintained when you present the information for the public. And you might have a personal attitudes or personal religious and professional attitudes, but all that should not go into your reporting. Your personal biases, personal opinions should not get into what you report for the public. So because of that, you have to present a story by maintaining balance, fairness, and objectivity. And uh, there is something called categorical imperative. So here that speaks, there is something called, it works like a rule that if something is good for a person, that is good, it might be good for all. So here it is something Immanuel Kant, he speaks that what is right for one, it can be right for all. So when you are thinking, when you are reporting something, etc., whether it is good for a single person or whether it is good for the society, you have to think about. Then only the news has to be printed. If there is no use in printing a news story, why you print the news story? So you have to keep in mind while reporting whether it is right, the way, whether what you are reporting is right or not. So here, based on that, a news has to be carried or news has to be printed for the public. Then something called principle of utility, whether the news has to yield anything, whether a news story is going to yield something, whether it is going to benefit anyone, etc. So you have to keeping in view, considering the consequences of printing a news story, you have to decide whether a story has to be go into pages or whether a story has to be broadcast through the broadcast media. So here, if the story has to be printed, you have to think about whether you can maximize the loss or whether you are going to minimize the loss. For example, if you a story relates to the communal violence, etc., whether your story has to be there or whether your story is going to promote harmony in the society or whether it is going to promote communal violence further. So keeping in view, you have to carry the stories in the broadcast media and also the print media. And in newsrooms, you have to decide here whether there is a need to print the story or not, keeping in view the consequences of the story after it is published. If a good is higher, if you compare while printing a story, it is going to benefit the society, then you can go about printing the story, even though it is going to cause less harm to the society or the public. Then you have to as a journalist, you have to treat all the individuals who are involved in the news stories as equal. Like justice is blind, justice is pronounced not looking at the persons or looking at their background, their power, their caste, etc. So the justice system looks at the individuals, all the individuals as equals. So the same way, when you are reporting about a news story, etc., you have to treat all the subjects who are involved in the news story as equals. And then only balance or fairness might be there in your story. So social differences might not be present while you report the news story. So the biased reporting should be avoided as a journalist because you are working for the society, or you are serving the interests of the public. Then there is something called harm limitation principle. So like just now I said, you have to look into the consequences of printing a news story, whether it is going to limit the harm or whether it is going to promote the harm to a person or etc. So keeping in view that you have to print a news story. So here uh, in newsrooms, uh, the media institutions have a responsibility, and it should not promote social unrest. Because of that, if there is a need to avoid a story, then you can avoid printing the news story if it is going to harm the public or the sentiments of the people, etc. So here, for example, when you are reporting on the crime relates to child abuse, reporting when you are reporting on the rape victims, etc., you have to hide the details related to the uh, persons, or you should not reveal the identity of a particular person who is involved or the victim, etc. And you should not nowhere providing information that leads to the identity of a particular person. So here, but if you print the name of the uh, child or who is involved, who is a victim of child abuse, etc., or anything which relates to the person, etc., then it is going to harm the family and uh, the other members. So keeping in view that you have to print the information. And while you are covering some of the sensitive information, etc., you must the tone and tenor of your language, or the way the story is going to be presented, etc., all that should be presented in a decent, sober manner, and the language which you use also should be acceptable for the public who is reading your story, etc. So when you are outweighing the information, for example, when you are reporting on the issues relating to the privacy of a celebrity, etc., you have to weigh the uh, information, the advantages and disadvantages. The public might have a curiosity to know about the individual, the celebrity, or a famous personality, but whether there is a public interest involved, whether it is going to help the public, etc., keeping in view that you can present a story. But as the Supreme Court of India in a judgment said that right to privacy is considered as a fundamental right, and it should be protected. It should be protected under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, and the media is nowhere have any right to invade the privacy of the individuals, etc. So you have to, keeping in view all this information, you can present a story. And when you are reporting on the conduct of a person who is discharging, or the who is working as a employee of a government, or who is in a position like MLA, MP, or like Prime Minister or somebody else, etc., there is a public interest involved. The public want to know whether the information relates to a person is right or wrong, etc. In those kind of situations, in the interest of the public, the information can be disseminated, and the public figure might not have the same kind of privacy as an ordinary person enjoys. So, even though when you are reporting on the privacy issues related to a person, you have to be very careful when you are reporting about the family members of that person, etc. So here, again, the other family members have their own right to privacy. And as a journalist or the media, we don't have any right to invade or take away the privacy of the individuals. So here, even though you report the private information or privacy information, etc., it should be correct. Otherwise, the individuals may approach the courts for defaming the reputation of defaming their reputation, and the media institutions are accountable for that. Okay, so here, there all, if you look into all this information just now what we have discussed, uh, you might came to know about what are the ethics or ethical principles, etc. So when we are into the era of technology, as a journalist or as an individual, we do have the need to follow certain ethical principles. The same way, the media institutions also have the obligation and they have to follow the guidelines which are being provided to them, and based on that only they can report the news the way it has to be reported. And the Press Council of India issued guidelines which are called as the principles of journalistic ethics, etc. Based on that, the newspaper industry has to report the news. The same way, there is something called News Broadcasters Association. They also provided the guidelines for the news and current affairs channels, and based on the guidelines only they can carry the news in the broadcast media. So here again, we have the Press Council of India as a separate unit, I think in your syllabus. So there we will discuss about the ethical principles which the media organizations has to follow, and the structure of the Press Council of India you have, and you also have the Prasar Bharati organization, how it came into existence, that you have the Prasar Bharati Act of 1990, and you also have A.K. Chanda Committee and Burgess Committee as part of your syllabus. Then we will discuss about the ethical principles, what constitute or what are the guidelines which a journalist has to follow in the next classes. Today we'll move on to the unit 1, what you have. So this is just an overview about what constitutes ethics and what is the need for the ethical principles, because you have the concept, the uh, paper itself as the media, law and ethics. Just if you have your textbooks, yes, there are no students, I believe. Chalo, we'll discuss about the salient features of Indian Constitution. That is the first unit. Will continue the unit 1, and we have some more time. After completing the time, I will log out from this Zoom meeting. So if you see the India is a democratic country, and India is governed on the basis of the Constitution. So what is Constitution? Constitution is like a Bible. It is the supreme law of the country. Indian Constitution is the supreme law of the country, which lays down the structure and principles which define the fundamental political principles, procedures, powers, and duties of the government systems. Fundamental rights are incorporated in Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, and we also have the directive principles which are incorporated under Part 4 of the Indian Constitution. And these Directive Principles of State Policy, or DPSP, are the guidelines or the principles given to the central and state governments to keep in mind while framing the laws and policies in the country. The Indian Constitution is the world's lengthiest written constitution. It also describes and sets out fundamental rights, directive principles, and also the duties of the citizens in this country. It is also described as a permanent living document which makes the government systems work. The country is governed on the basis of the Indian Constitution, and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is the one who is considered as the chief architect of the Indian Constitution. Finally, the Constituent Assembly, which adopted the Constitution on November 26, 1949, and the Constitution came into force from January 26, 1950, the day itself we celebrate as the Republic Day. The Constitution of India begins with an introduction that is called as preamble. It comprises the ideals, objectives, and basic principles of the Indian Constitution. The Indian Constitution assures its citizens of justice, equality, liberty, and it also promotes the fraternity among the citizens who are living in this country. The Indian Constitution declares India as a sovereign, socialist, secular, and democratic republic. It assures its citizens justice, equality, and liberty. It also endeavors to promote fraternity. The original 1950 Constitution is preserved in the Parliament House in New Delhi. The words secular and socialist were added to the preamble by 42nd Amendment Act in the year 1976 during the emergency. If you see the salient features or the important features of the Indian Constitution is a written constitution. I will just share the screen so that it will be easy for you to understand. You can go back and you can just salient features of Indian Constitution. Okay. So salient features of Indian Constitution. Indian Constitution is a written constitution and it is the lengthiest constitution in the world. For framing this Indian Constitution, it took 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. When it was adopted, it was consisting 395 articles in 22 parts and 8 schedules along with the preamble. At present, it consists of preamble, 25 parts containing 448 articles, 12 schedules, and the Indian Constitution is amended 104 times after it is adopted. The last amendment, which came into force on January 25th, 2020. Indian Constitution is a combination of rigidity and flexibility. The Constitution of India is a unique document which is of combination of rigidity and flexibility. Generally, a constitution may be defined whether it is flexible or rigid. It is decided based on the basis of its amendment procedure. In a rigid constitution, amendment of the constitution becomes very difficult or not so easy or easy, etc. In a flexible constitution, amendment of the constitution is easy and simple. And in India, the Constitution of India provides three categories of amendments. First category of amendment can be done by the two houses of parliament with simple majority of the members present and uh, and voting by the members before it is sent to the president for the final assent. The second category of amendment of the constitution requires a special majority, and it can be passed in each house of the parliament, the both houses, which includes the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, by a majority of the total members. By the majority of the total members of that house, as well as the 2/3 of the majority of the members present and voting in each house of the parliament. Then it is sent to the president for his or her assent, and which cannot be denied. The third category of the amendment, besides a special majority, which is mentioned, like it requires a special majority, and it can be it has to be passed by the both the houses of the parliament by a majority of the total members, and at the time of voting, the members, 2/3 of the members has to be present, and they have to vote in both houses of the parliament. Then it has to be sent to the president assent. Along with that, the special majority mentioned in the second category, the same has to be approved by at least 50% of the state legislatures. Hence, because of these three kinds of category of the amendments which may amend, which are followed to amend the Indian Constitution, etc., we call the Indian Constitution as flexible and also rigid. Federal polity, India is a union of states. India has adopted a federal structure of government where the government is there at two distinct levels. The first one is the central government or union government, what we call, and the second one is state governments. Both the central and the state governments have their own powers. The fundamental rights and fundamental duties. The Constitution of India guarantees fundamental rights, which are included in Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. And rights include right to equality, right to freedom, right against exploitation, right to freedom of religion, cultural and educational rights, right to constitutional remedies, and later on, right to education also was also made as a fundamental right. After that, right to information is also considered as a fundamental right of the Indian citizens, and it is guaranteed under the Article 20 of the Indian Constitution. After that, the right to privacy is also now considered as a fundamental right, which is protected under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. But the Part 3, whatever is there in Indian Constitution, that exclusively deals with these 6 fundamental rights, which has these 6 fundamental rights: right to equality, right to freedom, right against exploitation, right to freedom of religion, cultural and educational rights, right to constitutional remedies, and right to education. These fundamental rights, which covered under Articles 14 to 32 of the Indian Constitution, and these are one of the important features of the Indian Constitution. And the fundamental duties were added to the Constitution by 42nd Amendment in the year 1976, and there were 10 fundamental duties which are recommended by Sardar Swaran Singh Committee, and later on in 2002 with 86th Amendment to the Constitution, one more fundamental duty is added to the existing 10 fundamental duties which were proposed by the Sardar Swaran Singh Committee. The fundamental duties were added to remind the citizens of this country that they have certain obligations towards the country and the society. It is fundamental duty of each citizen in this country to further the national integration and contribute towards a betterment of the society. Parliamentary form democracy. India is a parliamentary form of democracy. In a parliamentary form of democracy, there is a close relationship between the legislature and executive. The president here enjoys a more abundant powers, but in practice, the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister, which really exercises these powers, and president implements on the advice of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. Integrated single judicial system. India has a single integrated judicial system with Supreme Court as the apex court of the judicial system. The high courts in all the states are below the Supreme Court, and these high courts control and supervise the lower courts like district courts. Independence of judiciary. Judiciary system in India is independent and impartial. It is free from the influence of the executive and the legislature. The judges are appointed on the basis of their merit or their qualifications. Single citizenship. There is only single citizenship in India, which means every Indian citizen is a citizen of India, irrespective of the place of his birth, his or her resident or place of birth, and can secure employment anywhere in the country, and they can enjoy all the rights equally in all parts of the country. Universal adult franchise. The Indian Constitution provides universal adult franchise. Anyone who has completed the age of 18 years, irrespective of his, her caste, creed, sex, religion, has the right to vote in general elections and choose their representatives by voting in favor of them. So these are the what we call the salient features of the Indian Constitution. So you have to remember, if they ask you to write about the salient features of Indian Constitution, first you have to mention that Indian Constitution as India is governed on the basis of the Indian Constitution. It is the world's lengthiest written constitution, and the chief architect of Indian Constitution is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, and the India itself declared as a sovereign, socialist, secular, and democratic republic. And the preamble is the introduction of the Indian Constitution. It comprises ideals, objectives, and basic principles of the Constitution. It assures its citizens, the Indian Constitution assures its citizens, citizens of justice, equality, liberty, and endeavors to promote the fraternity among them. Then salient features of the Indian Constitution. The first one is written constitution. Indian Constitution is a written constitution, and it is also lengthiest constitution in the world. And for framing this Indian Constitution, it took 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days. And it originally, when the Indian Constitution was adopted, it was consisting of 395 articles, 22 parts, and 8 schedules. But later on, due to the amendments to the Indian Constitution, at present it has preamble, 25 parts, and 448 articles, 12 schedules, and till 20 January 2020, the Indian Constitution is amended 104 times. Then Indian Constitution is flexible and also it is rigid based on the amendment procedures. Because of the Indian Constitution can be amended with a simple majority in both houses of parliament. Because of that, we call it as a simple, which is called as a flexible constitution. And because sometimes when you want to amend the constitution, it requires a special majority and it has to be passed by both the houses of parliament by the majority of the total members, and as well as at the time of the voting, 2/3 of the majority of the members has to present, and they have to vote in both the houses of parliament, and then it has to send for the assent of the president, and later sometimes it also needs to be approved by the 50% of the state legislatures. Because of that, we call it as also a constitution which is rigid. Then federal polity of the government, it is a union of states. We have the governments at central and the state. Both the central and state governments have their own powers and powers to exercise. Fundamental rights and fundamental duties are also incorporated in the Indian Constitution. Fundamental rights are incorporated under Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, and fundamental duties are also incorporated with the 42nd Amendment to the Constitution in the year 1976. Later on in 2002, one more fundamental duty is also added to the existing fundamental duties with 86th Amendment to the Constitution. A parliamentary form of democracy, which speaks that Indian Constitution India is adopted the parliamentary form of democracy, where there is a close relationship between the legislature and executive. And we have a single judicial system, that is integrated judicial system, and Supreme Court is the apex body of the judicial system, and it is the one which has power to more power. Then high courts, again, they are coming under the Supreme Courts, and under the high courts, we also have the lower courts like district courts, etc. The lower courts and district courts are under the high court, under the control of the high courts. Single citizenship, when we are born into the society in India, we get the citizenship irrespective of the place of birth, residence, or based on the gender, etc. And anyone who is born in India, anywhere they can secure a job or employment in our country, and they can exercise all the rights in our country without any kind of interference by the private or government or any other parties. And Constitution of India also provides the universal adult franchise, where individuals, those who are above the age of 18 years, irrespective of the gender, caste, creed, sex, religion, etc., they can participate in electoral process and they can elect their representative by voting in favor of them. So these are the salient features of Indian Constitution. Tomorrow we'll discuss about the fundamental rights. Then we have fundamental duties. Then emergency provisions are there in Unit 1. Then we'll move on to the next unit. Thank you. I am leaving the session. It is 1. Thank you.